Professor Kary Mullis is one of the most unique minds in America. He won the Nobel Prize. We did this interview late at night at his home on the ocean.
Do you believe that we have made science our final arbiter on what is right? And as a result, we continue to look at science, and scientists hold themselves up to make the decision that this is right behavior, that's wrong behavior. You can do this, you can't do that.
It's a good question, and I think the answer is definitely that science, in a way, having led to this sort of decline of let's say the Protestant Church. I mean, the Protestants got a little bit too involved in history and left themselves open there for scientists to come in and say, to debunk Christianity, because it became a mythological kind of thing rather than a only by faith kind of thing, and you know, it became it's not a real religion in the sense of like Buddhism or something. Science, having been involved in that, people said, well, we're not going to go to church anymore. It left a big hole in a lot of people's psychological makeup that has, I think, been filled to some degree by the ecological madness that people have got jumped into. And there, the scientists are, like you say, they are considered the final arbiters of what's good for the planet or what's bad for the planet. And they hadn't got the slightest idea. Instead of wearing white robes, they wear white lab coats, you know. Instead of like bringing you the word of God, they bring you the word of the EPA or whatever. And they don't have to understand what it is that they're making you do, in fact. And people, you know, just, I think they fall naturally into it because there is a need in humanity for something like a religion. Something that makes you feel a part of some larger kind of group. Something that you think, in spite of your wormy little life, makes you a part of something good, something big, something that makes sense.
But doesn't it also happen that when people were naturally evolving, it was necessary for them to take a responsibility for a major part of their life? If they didn't, if they couldn't make their own decisions about their own sense of reality in significant ways, then they would have succumbed. Today, very few people make many decisions that are really significant. If they feel something's wrong, they go to a doctor. The doctor frequently will tell them, this is your condition, and this is how to treat it. People are not questioning innate knowledge or innate healing, and as a result, we've relied upon a pharmaceutical model for all of our healing. In fact, medicine doesn't mistrust nature, mistrust the person's own ability to have their own healing experience.
Well, I think people are still responsible for their decisions, and they still make them just like they always have, and they do it with insufficient information just like they always have. It's just that the world's a little different now than, say, 2 million years ago, when maybe it was a matter of, do we go down there with the family next door, or are we going to stay up here in the canopy, or whatever. I mean, the decisions that people make are important to their lives, and they certainly accede to authority a lot, but I think that's always been I don't know if there's no evidence in my mind for the time, you know, from anthropological stuff, that there weren't always rulers and people that
we've always had a hierarchical order.
Right.
Even in the caves, we've had a hierarchical order. I believe in fact, my new book is just on that very topic, on life energies, where each born with a different life energy. I'm very concerned when the media publishes a story that came out recently in the New York Times and all the other papers, that now it's being mandated that there's going to be pregnancy tests to determine if mothers have HIV, if the babies have HIV, and then put the babies on antiretrovirals like AZT. Well, if you have a baby that has no developed immune system of its own, should be getting it breastfed to develop an immune system, it's going to take many months, in fact several years, to really fully develop. And you go and start giving a child that's completely healthy, just has an antibody in their system, and you give them a toxic chemotherapy drug, and then we are not.
Is that going to be mandated by law?
That's what they're trying to
do. They're not that dumb, are they? I mean, they to mandate it. What state?
Well, they've mandated vaccines. You can't get into some college. You can't have your kid go to school. You can't travel to certain countries unless you've had vaccines, and it's never been shown that vaccines can be predictive of who they're going to help and what the consequences of side effects are going to be for who it hurts.
Yeah, I'm a libertarian, true right to the heart, and I do not like to see freedoms eroded at all for whatever grand cause, and that would just that would almost I mean I can't believe that they would that I mean I can believe there would be some people in society that might like to do that, like that guy who used to be the head of was he the Surgeon General? That's he's written
C.W. Coop?
Yeah.
C.W. Coop, yeah.
Yeah, he's a bit on the sort of like a little bit like a Nazi kind of a guy in a way. And although he has he has some redeeming social value, but the man is, you know, just a little bit too much into. I mean, he thought everybody at the NIH should start wearing uniforms, you know, and that kind of a personality is capable, I think, also of thinking, yes, and we do have the moral right to make you give your kid AZT because it's our job to protect your child, even if you don't want to. That
state agencies have taken kids away from parents when the parent, based upon informed knowledge, chose not to give their child either AZT or other chemotherapy agents, either for AIDS or cancer. And these were parents who knew more than the average parent, and based upon their knowledge made an informed choice, and those parents were deemed unfit and abusive parents, and their kids were put into a foster home.
You know what? In the early 20th century, actually, or late 19th century, in the South, pellagra was thought to be an infectious disease. There was a lack of niacin because Southerners were eating corn instead of wheat. The poor farmers were, and they were taking kids out of homes there, thinking it was an infectious disease because everybody in the family was getting it. Put the kids in an orphanage. In the orphanage, the kid would get a little bit of niacin because they'd have some wheat. And he wouldn't get pellagra, so it made real sense. Took some guy, you know, it took him a government research station in South Carolina finally got some
Goldberg,
clever,
was it?
Goldberg.
Goldberg.
Some Jewish guy came down there with little brains and said, wait a minute, this is not an infectious disease. You know, they had to throw out all the idiots that were running that, but it was a long time, and they did the same thing. They took kids out of homes. All they needed to do was bring in a little bread, a little whole wheat bread. And
does it bother you at all? Every time we need a decision made, we're always looking for some scientist to tell us what to do, whether it's on cancer or almost any issue, where science has become state religion.
It bothers me when I see like people. You know, my mother's a good example of doing that. Sort of just, you know, her doctors are never questioned at all, even though her son is sort of a medical person himself and sometimes disagrees with him. Because I'm her son, of course, I don't have any brains, and you know, her little physicians are always telling her weird things. Yeah, it doesn't bother me so much. I like this planet. You know, I'm not upset about it at all. I'm not a crusader. If I had my way, I would make a few changes, and I would make them slowly and carefully. I wouldn't make any radical kinds of changes. I would change science to be more, just to be a little less responsive to central authority. Make it more, like if you're going to fund a scientist for something that he says, here's what I'll do for you, you give me $200,000 next year and I'll do this. I think, well, okay, why don't you just give him the $200,000, let him do what he wants to with it. Don't make him tell you what he's doing. Don't make him convince his colleagues that what he's going to work on with it. If he's good enough to give it to him for one thing, just give it to him and let him decide, because you'll get a lot better science that way, and a lot more freedom for scientists to actually pursue their own goals, and a lot more discussion, which is a really important issue today, about what is the proper way to go about what particular problem. You know, the way it's done now is it's rather medieval, and it counts on the fact that it's not true anymore, that scientists never lie, that scientists will always be honest, and that they aren't each other's competitor, that they're each other's colleague. You know, the way papers get published, the way grants get funded, all of that stuff is like ancient. It's the structure that worked in the 17th century maybe, but it doesn't work now. It works very, very much against science, which is, I think, one of the better institutions on the planet. I mean, science is why we are sitting here with, you know, lights and stuff like that, empirical science, but not, it's almost always flourished better when, you know, dissent was expected and in fact encouraged. To have a central authority like the NIH doing all the making all the medical decisions is kind of ridiculous.
Very prone to political positions that it shouldn't be
Yes.
taking in science. That adulterates science.
Oh yeah, it's very, very much. I mean, we knew, if we studied Hegel at all, that after the 60s, there was going to be a swing back to a repressive government, right? I mean, it just was going to happen. There was nothing you could do to stop it, I don't think. It swung farther than I thought it would ever go, but we definitely got into it, and that's, I mean, the whole business of AIDS, if you want to look at it as in a big picture, AIDS is a Hegelian, you know, it's the pendulum swinging back to the right. It's saying less permissiveness, you know, people that don't pay attention to their grandmother's code of ethics are going to suffer for it, right? And it's, I mean, you can figure out all the little mechanisms of how that happened, but you can also just look at it in the big picture and say, yeah, that was going to happen. And now is going to come a time pretty soon when it's going to go back the other way. Hopefully, the swings, I'm afraid that Hegel
You
was
mean we can
not
start
right.
to have some sex and enjoy it, not
Oh
feel
yeah,
guilty about
well,
it?
you know, I never stopped. I said those guys aren't going to tell me what to do with my personal life. I mean, and I know enough about the details of it to where if somebody wants to debate me about it, I can do it. And I would always try to be informed before I would make that decision. But also, if you didn't know anything at all about the science of biology, and you just looked at it from a sociological point of view, you should have been ready for the 80s. It's going to happen. It always does. Now, Hegel probably, I think he had the impression that the oscillations get less and less. It's sort of a damped pendulum. You know, it finally settles on something that's great. I think he missed there. I mean, it's chaotic. It's like he had the wrong geometry. But it will go back and forth, and it will, because that's the way that is. In fact, it's probably important to the success of any species that it tries some, you know, experiments, but it never goes too far from something that has survived, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so you can see it as sort of it's an evolutionary standard in a sense. The idea that society will swing back and forth, experimenting a little bit, but then returning across some line that has worked in the past. You don't want to just keep going in one direction, because you might just end up falling off a cliff or off the edge of the earth.
You destabilize basic institutional control.
Destabilize basic institutional control. You mean as in the course of history?
Yes, individuals can make radical adjustments in their own lifestyles. Institutions never do. There's never been major institutions that make radical shifts, because they'd be shifting their power base. The whole effort of an institution is to maintain its power and stability of the power. So anything that threatens that stability is considered undesirable.
I would agree with that. But I mean, the institutions do go. They have this shifting sort of thing, but they don't go very far.
Very small.
I try to stay out of that stuff as best as I can,
but
personally.
Look at this. This is Peter Duisberg, right?
Yeah.
Inventing the AIDS virus. Here's a man, the fair-haired scientist who was considered a poster boy of science, right?
California Scientist of the Year in 1974, I think it was.
And now he's a pariah.
Not in this house.
No, but in this state and in that university, because when I filmed him in his laboratory 3 years ago, the laboratory had no funding. Now he doesn't even have that laboratory.
I know. They've made it.
And he was
martyred
tenured.
him, basically.
He was tenured.
Yeah. Oh, tenured, and also one of the most brilliant people surely the most brilliant virologist, possibly the most brilliant, you know, molecular biologist around. Peter is a very scholarly person in addition to being brilliant too. He's very careful. He doesn't say anything that he can't support, or usually. I mean, you can catch him in a weak moment and he might say something that he can't support. But he was a really well thought of guy too, because of his ideas. The whole field, I mean, in cancer, He's the guy that led him into the whole oncogene thing, you know. Big research bonanza. Anybody who could order a little kit from some company and hire a couple of technicians could be a cancer researcher because of things that Peter opened up. And then Peter said, no, I don't think that's actually the cause of cancer. And that made those guys a little bit angry. And then he comes along and does the same thing for AIDS. He said, you know, I think we're on the wrong track here. And for some reason, you know, the second time, it was almost like nobody even had to argue with him. Oh, it's just Peter again, ruining our fun, telling us that all this easy research stuff that we know we can do now for years, and the American people will pay for it, that we shouldn't be doing that. And Peter did that again. He did that twice. We need a lot more Peters. We don't have enough people like him, and you know, the system doesn't really, it doesn't work. It doesn't work to produce people like that. Yeah.
Peter has been marginalized. The media will not quote him without having a challenge quote.
Yeah.
Where there was a time when whatever he said was, like any other major scientist, would have been accepted on its face value. Now he is considered the controversial. They always preface the controversial, you know,
Oh yeah, yeah.
ex-professor.
Yeah, Nature states just over and over again, if Peter Duesberg can be shown to be an idiot, then HIV causes AIDS. That's what the argument comes down to in a lot of the media. It's just, it has nothing to do with, they don't talk about, you know, the issues at all. Nobody has ever come up with the arguments that need to be brought up to decide whether HIV has any effect on anything or
But
not.
let's just look at a few of those arguments for a few moments. If they are right, they meaning the NIH, NCI, Gallo, Fauci, if they're right, then their predictions should be right also, that we would have a pandemic worldwide, an epidemic in America, an infectious disease, sexually transmitted, that hetero and homosexual equally be susceptible to. That's their first argument. Based upon that, everybody got terrified. You mean we could get sex, have sex and get AIDS and die? Then we put the big chill on promiscuity in any form, and then we started making accusations about who caused this and then started blaming. Has any of those initial predictions come true?
Well, HIV, according to the CDC, if you look at the, and this is, anybody can buy the annual medical yearbook from Britannica, $39 or something like that, and look in there and see, and there's always an article in there about AIDS, and it's usually there's somebody from CDC giving a number, saying here's the number of North Americans infected with this virus. The article's usually prefaced, the headlines is HIV spreads into some new area, right? Spreads into heterosexuals, spreads into women, spreads into teenagers. But the number's always been the same since they started measuring it and estimating the number of North Americans infected by this virus. It has remained constant at approximately 1 million for 10 years. That is not an epidemic.
Now it's down
okay.
to
They had to
600,000.
drop it because they had realized all the false positives were starting to really mount up when they got into a population that did not have a lot of positives, and then the false positives become predominant. And you know what? This is the craziest thing I cannot believe this. When you find a kid, like a 19-year-old boy from Montana who's joining the Air Force, he turns up HIV positive. And he's not been around the block too often. Nobody's ever bothered to check his mother to see if his mother is also HIV positive, in spite of the fact that we all know that if a mother is HIV positive, there's a 20 to 30% chance that all of her offspring will be. Right? I mean, everybody accepts that. But for some reason, they can't see the simple reverse of that and say, wait a minute, this kid in Montana who's raised on a farm or something, who's HIV positive, probably didn't get it from, hanging out in the bathhouses in L.A. He got it somewhere. Why don't we just look at his mother and see if he got it? Because all you need is about 10 or 15 mothers of 19-year-old boys that have HIV and did when the kid was born to blow that theory right out of the water. No one's ever done that work. I don't understand why.
I contacted the CDC and I asked them, did you do blood workups on all the people that you claimed were included in the AIDS figures from day one? The answer was no.
No, they didn't.
About 25% of those figures were based upon symptoms. Then I
Right,
said,
yeah, a presumed
Presumed.
diagnosis of
That's
HIV. That was just like,
and I said, but if you're presuming it's HIV, hence AIDS, you must presume then that you have a gold standard that nothing else could have caused the same symptoms. And I said, there are at least 7 other,
friendly phone.
yeah, and I said, there are at least 7 other diseases that have the same identical symptoms of AIDS, such as tuberculosis and malaria, and also cytomegalovirus in its advanced stage and tertiary syphilis. And I was going through some of the diseases I had found that have this, and they kind of shrugged their shoulders and didn't address the issue at all. They just
Right.
avoided it. Then I asked him about Africa, and I said, no. And in this documentary, there's 5 countries in Africa that have, that you will see where doctors who've spent much of their life in Africa, their whole life as professional physicians in Africa, haven't seen a single case of AIDS.
Right. No, the African thing
In-
is a big joke. I
in-
mean, it's a bad joke, but it is a joke.
In the epicenter, they're saying, yes, we have malaria and we have TB, and they're not being treated because we're not getting any money, and it can be prevented and we could cure these people. We don't have fresh drinking water, they're drinking, and you'll see in the film, people drinking right out of septic water.
Mhm.
I mean, you'll see human debris right on the water. They scoot it
Yeah,
aside and drink
right.
the water, and then they get parasites and they get diarrhea. Well, if you drank out of infected feces water, you're going to get diarrhea and you're going to get tuberculosis in that environment, and you're
Right.
malnourished,
Yeah.
and you're going to have a dry, non-productive cough, lose about 10% of your body weight, and you're going to be classified as AIDS.
Right.
And he says, but if we give money for AIDS, then suddenly you'll see these new cars driving through the the highways here with loads of condoms and pamphlets,
Yeah.
but not a single antibiotic to help anyone with tuberculosis or AIDS or with
The World Health
malaria.
Organization has totally messed up. So, I mean, following the lead of the NIH, and those things. The article I read, this article about, it was a year ago, I think, in Nature, that just I could not believe that it was in there. It's had about 10 or 15 doctors with their names on it. They studied the prostitutes in some little Eastern African country right above Liberia. I forgot the name of it. It's a coastal country. They had gone there 5 years before and found that 75% of the prostitutes were HIV positive. They predicted if they came back in 5 years, half of them would be dead, right? So they come back in 5 years and there's no bodies to count. There's no dead prostitutes to do autopsies on. They're still HIV positive according to their tests, which there's cross-reactivity with all kinds of things. And their conclusion in the paper was that when that should have told them right there, I said, wait a minute, HIV doesn't seem to be hurting these people. The conclusion was these people have got this is in Nature, a special strain of HIV, which, number 1, does not cause any disease. Number 2, it protects you from the strains that are rampant throughout Africa that do cause disease. And we ought to study these people further because we might be able to develop a vaccine out of this. That was published in Nature, and it is on its face. I mean, even a 6th grader, I think, looking at the logic there, would say, wait a minute, these guys, the emperor has no clothes here. There's something serious wrong with the mind of these people. You know, they come in with a conclusion, and they just won't ever examine it. They don't, and when they see direct evidence that their conclusion is wrong, they just make up some ridiculous thing like that. And the WHO gives them money to come back there, and they probably have nice hotels on the beach there. But and doctors like to go on little vacations to collect blood, things like that, which don't take a lot of time, and then take it back home and study it for all year. And
When they said that it was, remember about 4 years ago, they said that AIDS is now becoming an epidemic in the black community. And that all these black women, heterosexuals also, that's when it started to make its move. They suddenly became heterosexuals, but they said it was black heterosexuals. So I went into the hospitals in Connecticut, in Pennsylvania, and started contacting hospitals around the United States. Not inner city hospitals, regular hospitals. Couldn't find any cases of AIDS or HIV-infected babies. I went to Hall Hospital in Brooklyn, which is exclusively inner city, very depressed, poor people, and a lot of intravenous drug users. And I spoke with one of the, in fact, I spoke with several of the physicians, including one of the head of pediatrics, and the woman said, yes, we have a lot of women who come in here who are IV drug users. They're malnourished, they've got tuberculosis, they would normally be dead if we didn't get them off the street and give them some treatment. Because normally drug users who are heavy mainline, they die. You know, they've always died. You know, they're not in optimal health. And she says, yes, the babies will be positive, and most are black. So hence, they take one hospital and they make all the statistics from that hospital as if it related to all the blacks in America. We are dealing with less than 1/100th of 1% of blacks in the total country, but you make that suddenly represent a population group. And how you manipulate that statistic by not showing that it's all hospitals and it's all blacks, and that these are IV drug users. Suddenly the IV drug user becomes representative of heterosexual transmission.
Yeah.
I mean,
and
I can't understand why no one's challenging this.
Well, you know, I've been challenging it, but it's not real loud, because this is the first time PBS has come into my house and said, hey, what do you think about this, you know? I've had to fight really hard, you know, to get anybody. Usually I would go to I mean, until this year, when things are slowly starting to change, I think people are starting to realize this is serious, and these guys have got big woolen bags over their heads or something. They've been fooling us. They know, you know, the people that are AIDS researchers now are getting neurotic if you ask them any questions. There was a time when I first started asking questions, all I wanted was, where are the papers? Just tell me the papers that you read that convinced you that HIV was the cause of AIDS, because I need to reference those papers in some of the, I was working on a test for HIV with PCR, and I needed to write a little report to the NIH and say, here's the progress we've made. And the first line of it was, HIV is the probable cause of AIDS. And I thought that was true. This is before I got involved. And I said, what's the reference for that quote? And I looked for it for about 2 or 3 years, and I never could find it. And by the end of 2 years, I'd ask everybody at every meeting that I'd gone to that talked about AIDS, I'd ask, you know, I'd look through every computer database. There is no reference. There is nobody who should get credit for that statement. Now, that's a pretty weird situation in science, where getting credit for a discovery is the most important thing in your life as a scientist. You want your work to be associated with you, especially if it's got to do with something that's so important in the world that they're spending billions of dollars on it. We ought to know who was it that should get credit for pointing out to us that HIV was the probable cause of AIDS. And probable is not a very powerful word, but there is no such person. There is no paper, there's no group of papers. They can say, well, it's in there somewhere, but it's not in there somewhere.
Gallo couldn't find it for you?
Gallo wouldn't talk to me, but Montagnier couldn't find it for me. Montagnier said, why don't you, first they say, look at the CDC report. Okay, they're talking about the bulletin of mortality and morbidity that comes out every couple of weeks. That's not a scientific publication in the sense of, here's the data, here's the arguments, here's the conclusions. That's just a little thing that goes to doctors and say, when you see somebody come into your office with this kind of symptoms, you report it to us because it's possibly this or that kind of thing. It's not a scientific thing. It's not where the guy that wrote that bulletin that month doesn't get the Nobel Prize for having discovered that HIV is the probable cause of AIDS. Right? I mean, it's ridiculous to quote that thing. And then I said, and I told him, I said, I read that. I didn't think that was very, I mean, I'm talking about, where did science come by the notion? You know, who brought that up? Who showed it to us? Who explained it to you? Where did you come up with the idea? He said, well, there's this SIV stuff. And I said, yeah, but that was last month. We've known this for a long time. Who is responsible for us knowing it? Don't we want to know that person's name? He walked away. I figured that was the last person I ever asked. I asked a whole lot of people in that 2 or 3 years when I was certain at first that there must be an answer. Wasn't it, I mean, you know, I was in a different field slightly. I figured the virologists had that one taken care of, but they didn't. There wasn't a soul, and there still isn't. And the more you ask them, now you ask them, you can get thrown out of a dinner party. I mean, you sit around go to some virologist's house and start talking about questions like that, or even, you know, people that aren't virologists, people that are just ordinary people that are completely ignorant of the details will get mad at you if you start talking about the fact that AIDS may not be caused by HIV. Just say something simple like, it may not be caused because I can't find any evidence that it is. these people that are being treated with AZT, a fairly lethal drug if you take enough of it, they may be taking a drug that's killing. I mean, you'd think the Oklahoma bomber is a bad guy, right? There's nobody in the United States that doesn't think the guy that killed those 200 people in Oklahoma for no good reason, you know, shouldn't be sentenced to death, probably. I think we all agree if he did it, he ought to be killed. Now, is it not criminal, just as bad, and maybe worse, to sentence a whole lot of other people? I mean, these people, there are people dying just because of AZT. I mean, that's proven in big studies like the Concord study. The conclusion of the Concord study was, this stuff is not good for you. You know, the little skeleton on the little crossbones, the skeleton and crossbones on the bottle says probably wouldn't be a good idea to take this stuff unless you've got a good reason to. Now, I would say that probably if there've been, I don't know how many of the people who have died, so-called of AIDS, have actually died of AZT. Because it certainly would wreck your immune system to take that stuff for a few years. It's like if you started taking any other chemotherapeutic agent for the rest of your life, it would be that agent probably that killed you. You know, when you give chemotherapy to somebody with cancer, you give them a round of it for maybe 14 days or a few days. Hopefully you're not going to kill the patient. You're going to kill the cancer. The patient's going to survive. But you don't keep giving it to him until he dies, because he certainly will. And AZT is just like those things. It's a little more lethal than most of the anti-cancer things that people take for that. Everybody knows that those things, you wouldn't want to just keep taking them until you died. Why would they, I mean, how can somebody say, take this drug, it's not making you well, by the way, it's making you feel terrible, but we don't have anything else to give you, and this is going to cost you $8,000 a year.
Because someone postulated that the AZT would stimulate T cells, and then it was shown that it did not stimulate T cells, that it was, in a healthy way, that it was causing the body to have a hyperimmune reaction.
I didn't know somebody thought it was going to stimulate T cells. I thought they figured it was going to kill that virus because it's going to terminate DNA reproduction.
Yeah, that's what it does.
And it certainly does that, and it does that quite well in a lot of places that are not viral. I mean, it does that in normal immune cells, any rapidly growing tissue, just like any other chemotherapeutic type agent.
Hypothetical situation. How many, let's assume for a moment that HIV is the cause of AIDS, just for argument's sake.
Okay.
Right? How many HIV cells are there generally compared to healthy cells?
You mean how many cells are infected by the virus in somebody that's fairly...
Yes.
The numbers vary wildly around, you know, all kinds of... I wouldn't ever... I mean, there used to be a time when people said 1 out of 10 to the 4th, then they went to 1 out of 10 to the... There are some papers that say 1 out of 10 and 1 out of 100. It's not like it's got them all, for sure, and
Okay.
I don't think that means it can't cause the disease, because, you know, it could do something subtle, and it might not have to be in every cell. It's just that there isn't any evidence for that. And, you know,
But what is the benefit of killing 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 healthy cells to kill one sick cell?
well, if that one sick cell had some property about it that was going to get you.
But has that been shown to be the case?
Well, if it was, you know, let's say you had a way of, when you try to kill cancer cells, you kill a lot of healthy cells too. It's not a very effective treatment, but the argument is you got nothing else to do. You're going to try to kill the cancer. Hopefully, it's more susceptible to the chemical than the healthy cells. Now, in this case, they have the same argument, except for the fact that they say you're going to keep on using this drug, knowing that it's killing your healthy cells until you die. You're not going to take it for 2 weeks and then hope that you've killed all the HIV and now you will be alive. It's not like that. They said, no, we're going to do the same thing that we do to cancer, but we're just going to keep on doing it until you die. And hopefully it's going to prolong your life. Well, if it doesn't prolong your life, what they look for is surrogate markers. Now, have you heard that term battered about? Surrogate markers means, well, it doesn't seem to do anything for the disease, but it does every now and then do something for the level of CD4 cells that we measure, or it does something for this or that. Not that anybody really knows whether you want more or less CD4 cells at any particular time in your life. A lot of diseases cause CD4 to go up. A lot of diseases cause it to go down. Nobody's even sure if a CD4 cell is always a CD4 cell. It's a marker on the cell at the time that they do this little counting procedure, which is to stick a fluorescent tag on there and say the ones that light up have CD4 on the outside. And we don't really know what those cells do. The immune system is incredibly complicated. And the immunologists' brains are not nearly complicated enough to deal with it. We have these little, there are theories all over the place, but no real competent immunologist would tell you that CD4 levels was a surrogate marker for anything until we know more about it. But that's what they're using. That's what the FDA is saying. Yeah, you don't have to show that it helps them. These protease inhibitors, the same thing. You don't have to show that it helps the patient. You don't have to show a single life saved. All you have to do is show some little clinical indicator has changed in a way that somebody is hoping is going to make you better. I mean, it's a round argument.
I took a group of individuals who were HIV positive, husband and wife. They had both been intravenous drug users for about 8 years. Put them on a detoxification program, gave them a protocol under a physician where they were using ozone, vitamin C drips, bitter melon several times a day, liver flushes, blood cleansing with a lot of chlorophyll-rich juices, and glutathione intravenous. At the end of 1 year, the woman seroconverted to negative, and her T cells went from around 400 to 1200. The husband's were at 0. Both are ideally healthy. There's not a single opportunistic infection. Not only that, there's no indicator infections. For instance, they had cytomegalovirus, they don't have it. Herpes, they don't have it. Herpes 6 and mycoplasma don't have it. So here's two people. He's a construction worker, right?
Yeah.
Totally healthy. She's totally healthy. He has 0 T cells. She has a lot of T cells. Hers went up, his went down. And so clearly in this case, the T cells were irrelevant.
I mean, nobody was counting those cells with those the markers like CD4, CD2, CD8, that kind of stuff. Those had just become available to Gottlieb, I think is the guy that did it in Los Angeles, as AIDS came about. Okay, he had about 5 patients that are AIDS patients. His personal research interest was in using these new antibodies, OK4, OK8, that somebody in Japan had made, that could distinguish types of T cells. That was just a research interest of his. He wanted to see what they would tell him. You know what they did, and then they came up with names for them, like helpers and suppressors and that kind of stuff later. But they really didn't know. They didn't have any experience. There was no experience. There was no log of what a CD4 level meant before AIDS came along. And then they decided low CD4, bad. High CD4, good. Go up to the Andes and look at somebody who's never had an infectious disease. I'll bet you they don't have any CD4 cells at all. They don't need them, probably. They maybe have a couple waiting. But I mean, we don't know those kind of
I took a group of
details
marathon
about medicine.
runners who were terribly healthy, never had any risk factors at all. Vegetarian, and they were running a marathon. All of their CD4 cells were very low. In fact, so low, even though they were totally healthy, getting ready for the marathon, that had they gone in with any kind of experience of a symptom and someone measured their blood, they'd have said, oh, you're a candidate for AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
So that in itself, there are many conditions. Cytomegalovirus will bring your CD4 down. Epstein-Barr virus, ubiquitous in our population, 90% of the public have this. Herpes will bring your CD4 down. Malaria brings your CD4 down. TB throws them clear down into the cellar. So when something is so inaccurate, to make that a gold standard, that concerns me. Also,
well, it's ridiculous is what it is, and the question really is whether it should be considered criminal behavior on the part of people who have the public trust. I mean, it is criminal behavior to set off a bomb in a federal building. Is it criminal behavior to start passing out poisons to people who have no real diagnosable diseases, to babies, for instance? And the question, I think we get off in the details a lot in this thing, and it has been probably the worst part of it from the point of view of the public. There's only one real question that's relevant, and you don't have to think about CD4 cells, you don't have to think about all these other diseases with Latin names and stuff. You have to think about one thing. Who is it? And where is the paper that he wrote it down in who figured out that HIV was the cause of AIDS? Right? Who is that guy? If there's no person who can stand up in front of a scientific body and say, I'm that person, or this team of us did that, and here's how we showed it, You know, you don't have to get into the details. You don't have to worry about the hemophiliacs in Africa. You don't have to worry about all the sort of subterfuges in a way that just keep coming up to complicate what is really a very simple situation. Here we have a bunch of people that are definitely sick for some reason. It's likely that their behavior was so radically different than the behavior that had gone. It was an experimental kind of behavior in a way. It's not unlikely that they would have some kind of problems, some health problems. People stop sleeping and eating. People start using all kinds of substances instead of food. And they're associating with the world's getting more and more densely populated, and we're spreading more and more diseases around. It's not totally shocking that those people should come down with some diseases that'll kill them. So we don't need to postulate that there was an infection going on, since nobody actually did show that there was. What's the fuss? Why do we have to even think about CD4? Why do we have to think about, you know, all the details that they keep mercilessly bringing up? Why do we have to think about the whole genome of this little organism that has not yet been shown by anybody definitively, or even really probably, to cause a disease? What is it? What is it about humanity that wants to go to all the details and stuff and listen? You know, these guys like Fauci get up there and start talking. You know, he doesn't know anything really about anything, and I'd say that to his face. Nothing. The man thinks you can take a blood sample and stick it in an electron microscope, and if it's got a virus in there, you'll know it. He doesn't understand electron microscopy, and he doesn't understand medicine, and he should not be in a position like he's in. Most of those guys up there on the top are just total administrative people, and they don't know anything about what's going on the bottom. But the simplest person on the planet can say, well, if we know that this disease is caused by HIV, how do we know that? Who figured it out? Is it in the Bible, you know? Or is it in the Journal of the American Medical Association? Is it in some place where we can all look at it? That's what science is supposed to do. It's empirical science. That's what we do.
I ask, I think, a more fundamental question. If you're saying that HIV, not you, but rhetorically to the scientific community, saying HIV is the cause of AIDS, then are you saying that HIV by itself is the cause of AIDS? They say yes. Then I say, show me where any study has ever been published where HIV by itself has caused any illness at all. Now you're saying it causes 29 illnesses, including Kaposi sarcoma. And I say, show me the evidence that in the absence of any other risk factor, any other antigen, HIV causes Kaposi sarcoma.
I think they've given up on Kaposi's, haven't they? They can't. You can propagate Kaposi's in mice, and you don't happen to get HIV following it. Yeah. But I mean, that one is probably an alkyl nitrite kind of a problem. I think even Gallo himself.
But that was originally what they hung the hat of
AIDS
on.
Oh yeah, sure.
Kaposi's and pneumocystis. Those were the 1-2 combinations.
And you can get pneumocystis. You know how you give pneumocystis to a rat if you want to? Put him on a low-protein diet and give him some steroids for about 6 weeks, and he'll get pneumocystis. These guys were doing that same thing. Low-protein diet and a lot of steroids. I mean, all kinds of steroids. And that's the known way. I mean, that's what the people that study pneumocystis, that's the way they produce a rat model for pneumocystis. It's like, but you don't, again, like I don't think it's worth my time to worry about the details in this thing, because the really big fact is missing. Why do we think, just because Bob Gallo gets up, takes his sunglasses off and says, gentlemen, you discovered the cause of AIDS. That's all we have. New York Times article, CDC report, that's all we have. That's not enough. That's not enough to you know, that is not sufficient to like publish even a meager little scientific paper somewhere. That isn't enough for scientists to believe some inconsequential fact about some star 50 light years away. You know, that's certainly not enough to treat at the cost of billions of dollars a year, and at the cost of a lot of lives and anguish, and just destroyed. You know, lives have just been totally ruined by this thing, on the basis of some flimsy little statement made by a guy who's known to be a crook in lots of other ways, He lied about a whole lot of other stuff. Why we trust him there? If he was a witness in a courtroom, we wouldn't trust his testimony. We've caught him in too many lies. You don't trust him anymore. We don't trust. Well, actually, we don't trust Gallo. We don't trust him. Nobody should trust Gallo. Gallo's been caught too many times making up stuff. Okay, who do we trust? Fauci? Fauci doesn't know enough to, you know. If Fauci wants to get on television with somebody who knows a little bit about this stuff and debate him, he could easily do it because he's been asked. I mean, I've had a lot of people, president of the University of South Carolina asked Fauci if he'd come down there and debate me on the stage in front of the student body because I wanted somebody who was from the other side to come down there and balance my, because I felt like, well, these guys can listen to me, but I need to have somebody else down here that's going to tell me the other side. But Fauci didn't want to do it. He didn't want to talk about it.
Based upon the HIV equals AIDS hypothesis, they didn't give us the test. Now,
they didn't give it to us, they sold it to us.
Now, who sold it to us? Who gets the money off the
Bob Gallo himself was getting quite a bit off of it. He had to give a lot back to Montagnier when it was finally proven that he stole the virus from Montagnier in the first place. But Montagnier and the Pasteur Institute are getting $1, I think, or so every time that somebody gets an HIV test.
Is that test a gold standard? Will it only identify this HIV virus?
If you get it twice in a row, you have a pretty good chance of getting a plus one time and a minus the next. I mean, it is not. It's nothing. Even if the virus were a deadly virus, we wouldn't want to use that test to test it. I mean, the way that test was responsive. Although that's why they thought for a while that it was widespread in Africa because it cross-reacted with antibodies to malaria. You know, that was the big deal. And they never went back and said, you know what, we just made a mistake there. Because we couldn't find the HIV-1 in the first place when we looked for it. When we looked for the organism in Africa, we didn't find it. So we found something else that was close enough, 33% difference in sequence. It's not close at all, not for retroviruses. They found something else. They said, this is HIV-2, we're going to call this for a while. Now they just dropped that whole thing. They don't look for it at all anymore. You go into any kind of a like a lot of places in Africa, the only kind of place you can get any medical treatment is a WHO hospital that's there for AIDS, right? So anything you come in there for, you cut your knee with a machete, you're an AIDS patient in some little book somewhere. You know, it's just, and presumably you have HIV too, so they'll add that.
How in the world could scientists today, legislators, physicians, public health officials, give any legitimacy to a test that's determining, predictive, of a person going to die of a condition, and hence put on, almost insisting to put them on antiretrovirals when there's no gold standard? If a test cross-reacts with flu, vaccines, malaria, lupus, some arthritis conditions, and connective cell conditions, leprosy, with all these other conditions that can cross-react with, then it's not a gold standard, is it?
No, it's not. But you know, I mean, the general public doesn't understand the idea of a gold standard here. Neither do doctors, physicians. So, I mean, you know, you just pull the average physician away from his convention someplace in Cincinnati or something, and sit down and have dinner with him and talk to him about this kind of a situation, and see how much he really knows. Like, does he know what a Western does? Does he know what a Western blot actually does? I mean, how is it different from this ELISA test? Does he understand how an ELISA test is operated? Does he understand anything about the statistics associated with the times when they've been tried? No, he doesn't. And he doesn't give a damn either. What he knows about is that when he has a patient, he charges them a certain amount of money for every treatment that he does, for every little prescription that he writes, and he likes to have a lot of patients. And the county health department also knows that due to the Ryan-White Act, for every single person who is diagnosed as having AIDS in the county, $2,500 a year from the federal government. So the county health department is actually pressuring doctors by their little subtle ways. They're not coming over and beating them, but don't miss an AIDS case. You report it to us. If it's a positive test on the HIV, you report it to us because it's $2,500 in our pocket every year. I mean, it's a kind of a. I mean, there's plenty of reasons why they're doing it, but you know, one of them is not that doctors are intelligent people in this particular. I mean, the doctors have been dumb. The people that have taken the drug have been idiots also. I mean, they really are idiots. You go to some doctor and he gives you a drug when you're not even feeling bad sometimes, you start taking it and you start feeling worse, or you start feeling bad for the first time, keep on taking it, because otherwise you're going to get sick. And then, you know, you read about it. It's not like you can't find out about AZT. You know, you can find out about it. Look it's not that hard to look in books like the Merck Manual and stuff like that. See, what is this stuff? What's it used for? Why are they using it here? How did it get approved?
Why is it that they would allow Western blot to be used in the United States when it's been discontinued in England because it's worthless? And why is it that they're allowing a test that there's no two countries that have the same standard of how many bands it has to be compatibly reactive with? It's 2 in one country, 3 in another, and 4 in another country, making it very easy to test positive in one country, a little more difficult in another country.
If they didn't allow them to charge so much for it, I think there'll be a lot less use of it. You know, I think that money is the only, you know, it's just like in political scandals. Follow the money trail. Figure out who's getting paid for this. Who's getting the money for those Western blots. There's your person who's going to always come down on the side of, yeah, you got a confirmatory Western blots, they call it. You know, do a confirmatory Western blot. Well, let's see. And those things are so hokey, it's just ridiculous. I didn't know they don't even do them in England anymore.
No, not since 1992.
It's totally, and ask a doctor how it works. The doctor who prescribes, he says, got to have a Western blot to confirm this ELISA positive thing. How does that work, doctor? Sir, what are they now measuring about me that's different from what they measured with the ELISA test? He wouldn't know. He's not got any idea. I'll bet you there's scarcely 50 physicians in this country that know what a Western blot really is. They know when to order it, and they know they get a kickback on it probably. They make some money from having to take the blood or whatever, and they make money by prescribing AZT. They get money every time they turn around. They get money. Money is what makes it work.
To interpret the test also.
Well, of course.
Why is it that a person would get a vaccine shot like hepatitis or measles to create antibodies, to get an antigen reaction, so that the body will now have a memory cell so that when they're exposed in the future, they will be able to call upon that immune response. But when you have an antibody to the HIV virus, it's always predictive of causing the disease.
It was because, I would say, they didn't have well enough developed way to look for the virus itself at the very beginning. They could only look for the antibodies to it at first. PCR came along right about the same time that HIV did. And it was at CETUS that people started looking with PCR for HIV. That was the only way to see it, except for culture, which was a long, protracted procedure, which a lot of times didn't turn up the results there weren't very good either.
Can be contaminated.
Oh, the cultures, the whole method, that cell biology is a bunch of magic half the time. And those culture, you know, the people that say they can do quantitative estimations of HIV from cultures are just, they're fooling themselves. But I would say the answer to the question is the antibody test was something they could quickly develop. That's what Gallo did, and sell, and so he did. And he said, we're going to make a lot of money off this. Everybody in the world is going to have to take this test to find out who's going to die of the plague. And a lot of people did take it, and he got a lot of money for it. I mean, and there's all kind of people all the way down the line getting paid for doing something that's absolutely insane. I mean, now, where is John Q. Public? You know, he's busy playing video games or something. He's he's asleep at the wheel. He's not saying, what are these guys trying to pull? I thought antibodies when I was in high school were good for you. Isn't that what cures your diseases? And if we're going to make a vaccine for this thing, isn't that going to make antibodies to it? Wouldn't that be the way a vaccine would work? So if you take a vaccine for HIV, you get AIDS, don't you?
Yeah, antibody gets an antibody.
It's like ridiculous. If we had a vaccine out there widely used, then everybody that had taken it, we said, well, let's see, how do you tell whether they don't have it or not?
But you're talking about 100,000 scientists who are making $6 billion this year, more than on cancer and heart disease combined. Mm-hmm. You'll have probably 5,000 to 15,000 studies written and published over the next year and a half to 2 years on this phenomenon. Everyone wants to be a part of that action. Why is it there's only a small handful of scientists like yourself and Gilbert and Duisberg who are willing to challenge this? What makes you different than 100,000
One thing that
people?
makes me different is I don't have to answer to anybody for money. See, I don't work for some organization like that Tony Fauci happens to be the head of. Like a lot of people, like Duisberg, had the intellectual integrity, knowing that he was going to catch it, knowing that they were going to just have a heyday pulling his grants. He went ahead and said it, and he's been martyred. Okay, they couldn't touch me because they weren't paying me. They can laugh at me. They can write stupid little articles in Nature, but they'll learn eventually to feel foolish about having done that. I know that was going to happen. Duisberg knows that one of these days, these idiots are going to have to face the music.